Welcome back to the Blues Notebook, episode 4. I'm once again joined by John Colman as the National League is now underway for another year. For Carlisle, it was a rather lacklustre Saturday, and today we'll be breaking down that opening day loss. Do we have the squad to play Rob Elliot's brand of football? The booing debate, alongside looking ahead to Yeovil. But first, Gabe Breeze is now a Cambridge United player, with Adam Desbois joining the Blues. John, thoughts?
Well, it's in one way I'm glad it's come to a head because this has been a backstory through much of the summer, isn't it? Certainly sort of midway through pre-season, we were given a strong impression that there was something regarding Gabe Breeze that might happen. There were bids going in, bids getting rejected. And, you know, a lot of the transfer brinkmanship play that we don't always see was going on. I thought the tone Carlisle struck quite early was one of a club that was at some stage prepared to sell. And that stage might come, you know, eventually over the summer period. It certainly wasn't the, you know, he's our player under no circumstances. Do we want to lose him, etc. That line in the sand was never drawn. So I think this was always looking like it was going to perhaps materialise. And here we are now with Breeze gone and Desbois coming in. It all sort of happened, it was all finalised, I should say, on Wednesday. Different thoughts and views have been aired about this, as I guess they often are about goalkeepers in particular, I think, as well. They can be quite a polarising position when it comes to debate and analysis. First thing to say is to wish Gabe well. You know, he's a local lad, he's come through the academy. I think he's largely done himself proud in how he's emerged at a pretty young age into that position. And, you know, just in terms of his character and his personality, again, I think he sort of goes away with a lot of credit, really. Whatever people's debates and opinions might be on how highly they rate him, on how much they don't, whatever. It's, you know, it's a local guy from the area, from the academy, who's come through, pushed his way into the first team, built an amount of games, and now he's going on. So we can only wish someone like that well, I think. Just in terms of the, you know, breaking down what's gone on, I just hope it's going to be one of those situations where we don't start looking back and saying, well, we should have been careful what we wished for. Certainly from, you know, the point of view of the people who are leaning towards being quite happy or content that he's gone. That'll come down to how good Desbois is, of course. You know, if it's going to be sort of the straight swap like that, if Desbois has come in as first choice, and that's something that needs to become clear, I suppose, over the short term. We don't know quite that yet, but we have to hope it's going to be the best upgrade or match Carlisle have been able to get, and that's what will be fleshed out over time. Gabe's sale, I think, as well underlines a little bit more. It's another one of those that show just where Carlisle are at the moment. You know, that they've lost an academy product, a young player, one of their few current real saleable assets, you'd probably say at the moment. Yeah. There might be others that might develop into that, but I'm not sure they're stacked with too many right now in sort of Gabe's position. And they've lost him to a club who, you know, only 2 or 3 years ago were playing in the same division as Carlisle, and you wouldn't necessarily have been sort of staring up at as a club where one of your top young players would aspire to go into with every respect. So this reflects where Carlisle have slid to, and it reflects where Cambridge have got to and sustained as well, I suppose. I think Carlisle are losing a goalkeeper who, while he has taken some criticism at times over the last season, and I don't think last season was a perfect season from Gabe Breeze by any means, I do think Carlisle got a lot more than they lost from him in general. You know, and I just think back to when he came into that side, sort of for the duration, in the autumn of 2024, when, you know, we all know how unsuccessful the Harry Lewis spell as Carlisle's number one turned out to be. And when Gabe got his chance under Williamson, I know he'd had a few appearances the season before, but when he came in for that Wigan FA Cup game, I just remember the sort of sense of relief that was going around the ground just in the early stages of that game, when he would just take command of his box, come out and grab a cross, show a bit of stature. There was almost one or two ironic cheers early in that game, as I remember it. And often when a goalkeeper gets ironic cheers, it's not a favourable thing for him. But in that case, it was ironically, goodness me, we've got a goalkeeper who's coming for crosses again, who's maybe doing some of the bread and butter some things that have got a bit old-fashioned in some goalkeeping interpretations, but Gabe brought a bit of that back, and I think, you know, he was 20 years of age at that time, and he didn't really give even a coach like Mike Williamson with his particular principles. He didn't give him much choice but to keep him in that team from there. As much as Harry Lewis might have been superior with his feet or whatever, Carlisle's sense of security was notably improved by Gabe Breeze coming into that team in pretty difficult times. And from there, he's been the regular number one, and he's been that on merit. And, you know, it was one game short of an ever-present season in the league last season under Mark Hughes. And, you know, I think we've got to give Gabe due credit for that. And remember some of the very memorable moments he had along the way as well. I mean, that save against Colchester in one of Hughes' very early games from Lyle Taylor was something that was getting talked about for quite some time afterwards, and quite rightly so. The penalty save against Port Vale later on in that season, that was just a classic moment of Brunton Park drama, and that it was a Cumbrian lad contributing to that. He was talking about everyone going Raj after the game in his interviews too. It was a lovely moment, that even in a hard and failed season ultimately. And last season, you know, his tally of clean sheets was pretty good. It wasn't too far shy of some of the best in the division. And I sometimes think with goalkeepers, when it comes to some of the criticism he got, and there were some errors, you know, that the Solihull Moors away game, the first goal in the Boreham Wood playoff game wasn't one he'd probably reflect on too fondly, but these will happen along the way, and it's a case of reducing them over time, I suppose, as you mature. I sometimes think we don't generally give goalkeepers, even young ones, the same sort of grace and the same time to develop as we might do outfield players. It's that sort of position, I suppose. It's the perils of the position. It's not somewhere where maybe young players are fed in and out quite as much. It's that position where sort of consistency of selection is prized almost above everything else. I mean, I just compare, just been jotting down some of Gabe's stats with someone like Jack Ellis as an example. Both academy lads, both of very similar age. There's only a couple of months between them. And I look through Jack Ellis from his debut season of where it was right at the end of 21-22. So 2 appearances then. Season after that, he was 17 appearances. After that, it was 19, then 26. And then last season, it was 44. Now, Gabe's sort of equivalent record is a lot more condensed than that. You know, he got those 4 appearances in 23-24 when Paul Simpson briefly put him in. And then the season after that, as soon as he came in, he was in, and that was 35 appearances. And last season, I think it was about 46 in all competitions or thereabouts. So I guess while they're of similar age, you could say Jack Ellis has had a more gradual run up to that sort of regularity of selection, whereas Gabe, other than that first season, once he was in, and he was expected to be good enough to sustain that. And I think largely he was. And therefore, I think in some respects, it might be a hard act to follow for Desbois. We'll probably come on to him a bit more in a moment. And, you know, the fact that a League One team has been eager to take Breeze, he's young, he's still got, you know, a lot of development to do. In that respect, he can be an asset to them as well. You hope Carlisle have loaded the deal enough that it can benefit them down the line. If Gabe goes on and develops, it's just a shame a bit more of that developing and flourishing isn't happening with Carlisle, because I think his ceiling could still be a fair bit higher than what we've seen up to now. So good luck to him, and let's hope that from Carlisle's terms that the replacement is going to be up to scratch.
Well, looking deeper into the deal, it looks like he will be second string goalkeeper behind Jake Eastwood, who himself last season in League Two got 19 clean sheets. I think Gabe Breeze got 17 in the National League, so it's nothing to scoff at. The only issue I see with the deal is I think Carlisle left it maybe a bit too late. A lot of goalkeeping options went. Obviously, the ever-present Harrison Mayle. I don't know if we've mentioned the player that doesn't play for Carlisle more on the podcast than him. But we'll move on to Desbois. If you were to say to Carlisle fans, you're going to get a goalkeeper who made 13 appearances for Gateshead last season since March. Let's just bring Gateshead out of it. He's made 13 appearances. He conceded 11 and kept 5 clean sheets. it's not. It's a really good record, and I think the Gateshead thing's clouding judgment a little bit because as fans, you want to go and pick people from higher divisions or different teams and look like your scouting and your recruitment team are doing loads of research, not just going for your new manager's old club. But I think in this case, you can excuse them because it looks like he looks like a really strong goalkeeper. He's 25. He's a bit older than Breeze, so a bit more mature. Mm-hmm. He can play out with his feet more. That's something Rob Elliot mentioned. I think it's a good deal, and I think the Gateshead thing might be used against him, but I think fans just need to get behind him. Except, okay, he's from Gateshead, but he on stats, he's one of the best goalkeepers in the league in that 13 games he played.
Yeah, I think it's always going to be very difficult for people to take such a signing in total isolation for all the reasons you've touched on, the sheer volume of personnel on and off the pitch that have been coming to Carlisle from Gateshead this summer. If you're a Gateshead, you must be sick of the sight of that, that sort of Cumbrian phone number flashing up on their chief exec's phone or the managers or whatever. So in that respect, yeah, I can understand sections of the support maybe feeling a bit of fatigue at this. It's another one from Gateshead. I think we have to probably try and look at it in some degree of isolation, though, for some of the reasons you've said. I think, prior to Rob Elliot coming in, we go back to Easter time when Desbois and Gateshead came to Brunton Park, and he gave a pretty eye-catching performance. I think it's fair to say. Now, you should never draw all your conclusions based on one performance, and yes, some of the wider stats that you've cited is a broader sort of picture, yeah. But I think if people were coming away from certainly that game and maybe that stage of the season thinking about some of the opposition players, certainly goalkeepers that have just caught the eye a bit and impressed, I think he was certainly one of them. I remember the likes of Paul Huntington on Radio Cumbria's podcast sort of mentioning him as one of a cluster of players that he sort of quite liked the look of coming off the back of that season. So I think there are legitimate reasons why Carlisle would have looked at him since then, regardless of any prospect of Rob Elliot coming in. Now, you look at his broader career path in terms of being at some pretty big clubs through youth, and then he's worked through quite a number of non-league clubs and made his path that way, coming up the levels, if you like, and did appear to do very well last season. I think it's fair to say we've not seen a great deal of him as sort of supporters, observers, or whatever. So as much as we might think he's going to be the best thing since sliced bread, as much as some others might think it's another Gateshead player who's not going to be up to it, in reality, we don't really know that, do we? We might see what we think we know about his profile, and what glimpses we've had of him. The other aspect, I think, which is a clear and present issue at the moment, is he does come in a bit of a pressure situation. We know it's one game into the season and we shouldn't ramp that up too much, but we know Carlisle had a false start to the season now in terms of that defeat. We know there's been, a heck of a lot of debate, discussion, argument already, in less than a week of the season having gone by. It feels like longer somehow, doesn't it? So we're at a point where Carlisle don't want to be stumbling through the next 2 or 3 games, getting more poor results sort of straight off the bat. So if he does come into the side straight away, we don't know that yet, then there's going to be an amount of pressure to perform and to not have people saying, what have you done? You've sold Breeze and brought in someone that's not going to be as good, and things like that. As much as you want to allow patience in with all of this, there's going to be a need for immediate performance on some reasonable level because of what Carlisle want to do this season. So there's a large wait and see element hanging over the whole thing, isn't it? But it does need to be good, and it needs to be good quickly. That aside, I think everyone concerned will need to be aware of that. He'll need to hit the ground running, of course, like much else.
And finally, just the last thing, touching on Gabe Breeze, he's a Cumbrian lad. He's come through the academy. He's put up 85 appearances for the club. How important is it to see those Cumbrian lads come through and get moves further up the pyramid? And it shows there's a real hotbed of talent in the county that I think gets disregarded. We've got obviously 2 Cumbrian goalkeepers in the England setup. James Trafford moving to Leeds as well. There's talent within the county, and it must be so good to see for the kids in the academy and the kids in grassroots football seeing that happen.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. And whether or not a young player goes to the extent of a Branthwaite or a Henderson or a Trafford, or perhaps a rung or two down like a Carl Dempsey perhaps, and then perhaps now currently someone like Breeze who has got to move to League One, which is a couple of steps up. However hacked off we might be about the level Carlisle are now, then it is important. I think the academy will always need those sort of flag bearers for progress and for development and for going and making a career. I think Breeze has got himself a 3-year deal there at Cambridge too, and we know that footballers' careers are short ones. So there's an element of security he's got for himself there, and yeah, I think we wait to see who the next one's going to be now, don't we? We know there's Hayden Atkinson who's rich in potential as a defender, and Jonah Lowe's we're hoping will flourish in due course in midfield, and one or two others sort of coming up the wings too. So the academy will always need these examples. If Gabe is the next one, then that should show the way to someone for sure. I just wish him well. A last word on Gabe as a person, I think, because as much as we debate the whys and wherefores of the players as goalkeepers or whatever position, let's not lose sight of the young person as well. He's always someone that's been approachable, open, friendly, even from a very young age. Not all professional footballers of whatever age give you the cheeriest welcome all the time when you're on their patch as such, but never found that with Gabe. Always found him with a smile on his face, would be happy to have a chat with you. I remember going to interview Taylor Charters for a book I was writing a couple of years ago, and first thing Gabe did when he stuck his head around the door said, "Oh, do you want a cup of tea or something?" And it was just little things like that, just say a little bit about just what he's generally like as a bloke, I think, as a young bloke. So I hope the move works well for him. I hope he adjusts to the move, away from home and away from Cumbria for the first time as well. And I hope he pushes his way into that Cambridge team and goes and kicks on, because you want good people to do well, don't you? And I think Gabe is certainly that.
Yeah, we wish him all the best. Now, something that we've been avoiding for a little while, Worthing. I wasn't at the game. John was. What's your overall take before we break it down into the nitty-gritty?
Well, it was disappointing. It was very frustrating as much as anything, I think, because it was one of those games that Carlisle had firmly in the grip of their hands, and then that grip just loosened with kind of alarming speed in the second half, and that then goes into the questions about questions that have been raised, I guess, by supporters all week long about I guess certainly at least the short-term sustainability of the style of play and the intensity that Carlisle are looking to be when they're at their best, and how they manage that when they're not, in that sort of more high-octane end of things, and just about how the structure of the team coped when the tide started to shift. And that's unfortunately what we saw to damage in effect. Certainly the first half, Carlisle. I mean, my first thoughts during the first half were that, well, Rob Elliot before the game had said we're going to be without the ball for quite a long time against someone like Worthing, and I was waiting for that to happen because Carlisle weren't without the ball really at all for that first 45 minutes. It was all consuming. Carlisle should have had more than the one goal that they got. Had there been a couple up at least at half time, then it wouldn't have flattered the dominance they had and the territory they had. But as we all know, football isn't a 45-minute game. It's not a 60-minute game, and Worthing managed their response very well, and Carlisle coped with it poorly. Just the steam visibly seemed to come out of Carlisle's performance. That they started to look more leggy. They started to appear more tired. Now, Rob Elliot has contested the idea that it was a tiredness thing or a fatigue thing, and I think some things can be slight optical illusions when you're suddenly not performing well or you're struggling, but it certainly looked that way, certainly when Worthing was starting to not run riot by any means, but they were raiding Carlisle's territory a lot more, certainly for the first time in the game, and Carlisle didn't have the wherewithal to one, intercept that initially, and two, stop it from sort of manifesting itself again. So that was the concern to me. They didn't have the ability to turn the tide back, and they didn't have the depth in reserve on the bench to sort of enable Rob Elliot, I suppose, to do anything really significant to try and tilt that the other way. Now, you can argue that could he made changes sooner? Could he have shifted a few of the pieces around in terms of, moving Bunker up to midfield sooner or something like that, for example? And yeah, I suppose he did have the means to be able to do that, I guess. And we'll never know whether that would have been the kind of option that would have limited what was going on. But the ultimate conclusion, I think, you draw is that Carlisle do have to be much more secure when they're not able to play exactly the way they're wanting to do, which was what we saw initially. When the going's good, it looks good, but when a game sort of goes through one of its troughs a little bit, when it undulates a bit, when you can't be doing that for 90 minutes, I think it's very unlikely. Then you've got to manage that next phase a lot better than Carlisle managed to do. So was it personnel? Was it system? Was it structure? Was it subs or lack of them? You can probably blend a lot of that into the pot, but it amounted to a really disappointing and underwhelming outcome and a false start, as we've said. And it's led to a lot of debate, a lot of angst in a way in the short term. And it just puts a bit of pressure on Carlisle to get that response right and quickly as we move on to Yeovil now.
Just to play devil's advocate, and obviously fans have every right to be annoyed at the result. It's a game that you mark down as new team, first time ever in the division. Okay, they've got a manager that's been here before. They do have good players, but you're at home. You should be winning it. It's 3 points. You'd mark that and think, okay. But it's going to take some time to go from how Mark Hughes was playing football, which seemed to be get the ball to Regan Linney and let him do his magic. Obviously, there was more to that. He liked to play quite deep as well to invite sides on. Because, to be fair to him, he had a really strong defensive formation, and we were missing that on the weekend because our best defender was injured. But it will take time for Rob Elliot to bed in the philosophy and the principles he wants his team to have. But also, when the game is petering out and your side looks tired, and I know Rob told you that it wasn't physical tiredness, I suspect it may have been because from what I've heard, it was a high intensity first half. Every time Carlisle had the ball, they were suffocating Worthing a bit. It brings up these questions again that do we need to make more signings? Do we need to dip into the market? People were saying the only player that really came off the bench that had experience was Stephen Wern. Do you think Carlisle are lacking a couple of signings?
Potentially. I still think the glaring sort of shortage is in attack at the moment. It slightly concerns me about the level of burden. Georgie Kelly might need to still continue carrying in that number 9 position in the short term. He got his 2 goals at the weekend and I guess did his job as well or better than just about anybody else in that respect. But I still think that is the tightrope Carlisle are walking more than any other, I think. In terms of some of that structure and that, perhaps that midfield security and defensive sort of sturdiness, then I think help is kind of on the way in Harvey McAdam coming back. If not for Yeovil, then probably Hornchurch. I think that would seem to be the implication. They have got the 2 defenders from Gateshead in Nicholson and Richardson now fit and fully available from what Elliot said as well. So that gives them extra strength and numbers, we hope, at the back. That might free up Harvey Bunker to do his plan A role in that sort of defensive midfield areas. So we might get a little bit closer to what maybe Rob Elliot would regard as a bit more of an ideal setup to enable Carlisle just to have that stronger backbone, have that stronger spine. Because whatever they did have on Saturday against Worthing, I don't think you would say their spine was at its strongest and most kind of muscular, I suppose, with the midfield lineup that they had. So whether they need anything extra in there, you could certainly make the argument. I think when, within a week or 2, when Carlisle have a couple more of those bodies back, I'm not sure it might look quite so chronic in terms of numbers and in terms of options. We've got Jack Ellis there as well that wasn't turned to as such in that fundamental way on Saturday either. That's something he could have looked at, I suppose, whether that's in defence or in a more defensive midfield kind of area. So, and on top of everything else, I just don't see Carlisle doing a lot more business anyway, as much as we might want them to do X, Y, or Z. I think it's going to be sparing at the most. That's certainly the vibes that have been coming out. So I think the challenge is going to be to make the various parts work in a way that what parts were available on Saturday didn't, if you like.
Another issue that I've seen a couple of fans create a little bit of discourse about was Cameron Harper in the midfield. Is it something that's going to stay? I've heard people say he looked okay, others said he struggled. What were your thoughts? And do you think that's going to be something ever present in Rob Elliott's side, turning to Cameron Harper in that position when they're a bit light in midfield?
I think he likes the idea of Harper in there. He's been pretty clear in what he said about that, and the fact that he selected him in, those run-up friendlies and then the first game certainly suggests that. I think, in a way, Harper's afternoon mirrored the teams in general, really, in terms of, I thought he started the game pretty capably, pretty fine. He was generally, which I think his role would be, just a bit of a link man in that sort of deeper midfield area. And I thought he acquitted himself, without any problems really in that respect to start with. I just think Carlisle suffered for, and it wasn't just on Harper. I think it was I think that the whole picture started to regress in that second half, and they couldn't get a handle on what Worthing was starting to do to them, and Harper's involved in that along with others. I don't think it'll be plan A. As much as Elliot might like the idea, I struggle to see that. And over the next 2 or 3 games, we'll see exactly what that probably looks like when he's got more availability from your McAdams and people like that, and maybe pushing Bunker up, etc. The Harper in midfield debate also relates to what people think of the last time it happened. Because Mike Williamson used him in there. And I think people concluded that was a bit of a failure in some ways. I had a little bit of a look back at that time because my memory was telling me that Harper's time in midfield under Williamson didn't necessarily coincide with the very worst of Williamson's reign. And to some extent, that's actually right, because looking at his games that he played, and certainly the first few that he played him in midfield, Williamson weren't too bad. He came into the position in an EFL Trophy game at Morecambe that Carlisle won, and he kept him there for the next few league games where Carlisle were just starting to look a bit suspiciously competitive under Williamson. They went to Bromley and got a draw 1-1. They drew at home to Doncaster 0-0, and Harper was denied a late winner by an offside that day. They drew against Crewe. These aren't sensational results, but in the context of that season, they're not bad ones. Then Williamson tinkered a bit, and they lost to Chesterfield at home. That was a pretty bad one. Harper appeared in other games that didn't go too badly, like a 0-0 draw at Port Vale and a win at home to Accrington. But there were other ones like the shocking defeat at home to Morecambe on Boxing Day that, to many people's minds, should have been Williamson's Waterloo, if you like. And then early defeats in the new year, and the unravelling was very much back underway by then. So from 10 games, if I've got my numbers right, a couple of wins, 4 draws, 4 defeats. So that's not a vintage spell that vindicates anything in particular, is it? But you could say 6 games out of 10 where they weren't defeated wasn't the worst of it either. So I don't think there should be a rush to dismiss the idea in terms of having any potential use or benefits at all. I think Harper gives himself to the role and gives himself to the idea of the versatility with as much commitment as you could certainly want. But I think Carlisle in the fullness, when they're looking at their very best, are going to need something more in there. Quite clearly, they've recruited to have more there. And I think we all probably hope we're going to see that more, with every respect to Harper and what he could potentially bring either now or maybe down the line if it's deemed needed. That there's going to have to be better and more substantial options there to make Carlisle the very best it can be.
Regan Linney had quite a torrid day. I've read that he could have had a couple of goals at least.
Yeah.
But there was one thing that stood out that people were talking about was his body language. And we're not criticising him, and we know Linney. He can look like he's not interested when he doesn't have the ball, but he's always switched on and he's always ready to pounce. Is it just a case of a bit of ring rust? the pre-season we did miss a game when the Fleetwood game got cancelled. Just getting back into the swing of things and obviously learning a slightly different position, floating in Rob Elliott's side rather than being a left-sided attacker. I feel like he'll tick up, and you can't write him off. And I think he'll be there or thereabouts for Yeovil. But it's just things like these that give fans worries in the back of their mind, especially when we're coming into a new era that we want to get out of this league so quickly. We've had a season in it. We don't want another one after this.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of context there, isn't there? There's a lot of sort of the background feeling there that's present. I mean, Regan Linney's body language was something Rob Elliot talked openly with when I spoke to him at his press conference the other day too. He said it's nothing I've not spoken to him about, so I'm kind of happy enough talking to you guys in the media about it as well. It is a side that he probably needs to work on to some degree. He sort of, I think he kind of explained it as, look, this is how much he kind of cares about what he's trying to do out there, and I was kind of, I guess he's regarded by many as the main man for Carlisle, and I think most good players have that feeling about themselves when they walk onto the pitch as well. So perhaps there's a bit of that in Linney, and when it's not going as well and his radar is off, as I guess it was against Worthing, then frustration is going to manifest itself, and it's just about managing that, I think. And something that, well, certainly from Rob Elliott's point of view, Linney just has to learn and work on along the way. But I hope this kind of debate doesn't dominate too much and smother what we've seen and liked very much from Linney in his first year at the club, and invariably he's Carlisle's most important attacking player. And there were certainly times, quite a lot of times on last Saturday when he was still that. He just, I mean, his best chance was probably the very early one in around about the 9th minute when Archie Boyd cut it back from him. And I think, 7 or 8 times out of 10, you expect the ball to hit the net there. And then all of a sudden, Archie Boyd's got an assist from this left-sided role that people are debating as well. Linney's off and running within 10 minutes of the new season, and all's well in the world. So I imagine he's probably been like a bear with a sore head in training all week, just, hacked off that he didn't get that goal. He had other chances too. And it just maybe called for just an extra amount of composure in those moments. Maybe a bit of first day of the season tension and things like that. But Carlisle needed a bit of a colder head in general in some of those areas when they got in early. And in fairness, Worthing showed them what that looked like when they took their later chances. So I hope in Linney's case that he can take a bit of that frustration out and channel it in the right way at Yeovil. And we'll see what we like to think is the real Regan Linney, whether that's in that number 10 area, which seems to be where he's kind of sort of fixed at the moment, or whether it's wherever else he may roam. But Elliot did say one thing. He said, we're far better with Regan Linney than without him. And I think all things considered, it's hard to disagree with that. So let's hope we see the best of him again, ASAP.
And the last point before we move on, we don't want to chew over it. And you've had some nice pieces in our online coverage covering it. The booing debate. The fans pay the money and they have every right to express how they feel. It's, in my personal opinion, it's a little bit reactionary. But when fans are coming back and saying it was at the owners, you can see where the frustration lies. The fans have gone from 2 transfer windows with signings and money being spent, and look at this shiny new player we've signed, and look at this shiny new player from League One. Jordan Jones has played in the Europa League and we've signed him. And then this season it looks like the owners don't want to put their money where their mouth is, when you've fans thinking we got so close last year, we need maybe 2 or 3 extra, and that hasn't come in the way they feel. You can understand where it's coming from, but in my personal opinion, I think it's a bit too early. You don't win trophies and medals on the first game of the season. It's 46 games. We've played 1. Let's see how it goes for the first 4 or 5. And if it's an absolute disaster like Mike Williamson, boo, it would be warranted. What are your opinions on that, John?
I think some of that perspective is important to keep in mind, Matty. I think there's a lot of measured sort of sense in what you're saying. Nothing is settled after 1 game of the season. And, what you said earlier about the new Elliot way, the change of style, realistically, that kind of change, is going to take a degree of time. I think on that one, I think this speaks to the tension that I think was always going to be there this season between that change of style and the patience that might require, and the urgent need for Carlisle to win this title and get out of this division this season. There's always, can those two meet together? I think there's always going to be a bit of a clash there, and we're maybe seeing that in the short term. In terms of the booing, I think there's a deeper context to just people booing the first defeat of the season. I think this has been aired and debated quite a lot, and it's something I looked at in one of the pieces that you mentioned too. The booing doesn't come from nowhere. It doesn't come from just one game. It comes from a sense of frustration. Is probably a light way of putting what people feel about Carlisle still being at this level. We're at a second season in the top of non-league, consecutively for the first time ever. This is the lowest Carlisle have been, league table wise after one game. We shouldn't stare at that too much, I don't suppose. But, in reality, it's the lowest Carlisle have ever been since they became a Football League club.
Yeah.
So I think there's always going to be, even on the good days, there's always going to be an underlying kind of undercurrent of dissatisfaction about that. And when the days aren't good and when the days are badly flawed, like they were last Saturday in the end, I don't think it's a surprise that bubbles up and comes to the surface now. I think you're right. I don't think, and again, you can't speak for every supporter, and everyone will have had their own motivations for booing or not booing. So I don't presume to know what all of those were, but I think just standing back and looking at it from afar, I think that wider picture probably did inform a lot of it, and it wasn't just a knee-jerk lashing out at Rob Elliot and his new players. I don't think for those players and Rob Elliot that they'll have felt it was particularly enjoyable or helpful necessarily. I don't imagine it is. But they were in the unfortunate place in some ways of being the visible representation of Carlisle United on that day. They were the people in blue shirts that were walking towards those supporters who were hacked off by what they'd seen, and they were the sitting targets for their sentiments. There wasn't an owner on that pitch. There wasn't a sporting director there. There wasn't any recruitment there or any chief executive there to take that. And so the people in the blue shirts with the badge on are going to be the target, I suppose, rightly or wrongly. I thought actually both Rob Elliot and Harvey Bunker, when we interviewed them both on Tuesday, responded to that subject pretty well, actually. Harvey Bunker in himself, still as a pretty young player, I thought was pretty measured in his feelings on it. He said, look, I'm not going to pretend I enjoyed it. I'm not going to pretend I liked it. But at the same time, it would be slightly odd if people were just sort of quiet and content with losing that type of game as well. I think it underlines where the expectation is and what the demand is of Carlisle at this level, at this sort of stage. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing that gets verbalized, if you like, as long as the verbalizing of it stays on the right side of the line. There's no suggestion that it crossed any line last Saturday. We don't know that. But I think everyone concerned has to be realistic about what people feel about where Carlisle are. And if there's signs of that not going well on the top of that, it's not going to be something people are going to be just sort of quietly a little bit disappointed at. They're going to be pretty furious about it, because this is not where people think Carlisle should be, and rightly so as well. There's got to be a demand for Carlisle to be better. There's got to be a pretty ruthless attitude from everyone concerned to ensuring that Carlisle aren't going to be here for long. There's got to be a balance, like you mentioned. Of course, there has to be a balance of perspective in where this season is, which is at the infancy. But I think it's futile to think that people are going to just rub along with low performance or underperformance at this particular level. I just think it's not going to happen, and in many ways, why should it?
Now, looking ahead, Carlisle make the trip down to Somerset. One positive is the cider. I'm not sure the trip down and how long it takes for the fans and yourself is too exciting. But let's hope we see some more exciting football when Carlisle face Yeovil. In our predictions in our last episode, we both thought Yeovil recruited really well. I think you saw them slightly higher than where I did. Their first game, they drew 1-1 against Scunthorpe, but I think that was a late equaliser from Scunthorpe, so pretty good reviews I've seen from Yeovil. Could be a tough challenge, and of course, facing Archie Davies again after quite a torrid time last season, being out the squad for a while. Does he have something to prove?
He may have. I mean, we don't know that without sort of getting into his psyche, I suppose. You'd imagine there'd be a little bit of that, probably, won't you? He was a player that was probably very frustrated about how last season unfolded in the main. There was that period when it looked like he might leave. That didn't quite happen. Mark Hughes had things to say about how he was training in the wake of that. He then eventually came back into it late on, but he was not a frontline sort of pick really anymore after that, was he? So fresh start for him. First home game as well for him and for them this season too. So you imagine there'll be a fair amount of energy around the place at Hewish Park on Saturday. A team that do seem to have strengthened, as we touched on before, do seem as though certainly on paper they look like they've got a bit more about them as a squad. So yeah, it will be an interesting challenge, and we hope that the cider tastes sweet, don't we? I think certainly from Carlisle's point of view, you want to see something more reliable as a 90-minute offering, and we want to see some of those issues that we've touched on addressed over a more sort of substantial piece, and we want to see. Does Desbois come in, or does he stick with Mayer in the short term? Does someone like Nicholson maybe come in? And we want to see that some of these things taking effect. We want to see someone like Linney hitting his straps, don't we? So, Yeovil, last season they were 16th, and they had a lot of managerial churn early in the season, didn't they? Yeah. They went through 2 or 3 very early on. And since then, Billy Rowley he's had time now, I think, probably to put a bit of a stamp on the place, and over the summer, the squad. It was an interesting summer watching Yeovil from afar. There was a bit of heated controversy going on, wasn't there, with Rowley? Walton and Hersham, his former club, were accusing him of all sorts in terms of poaching players and the way he was allegedly conducting himself around some of that. Now, there was no investigation in the end over that. I think a lack of evidence was sort of cited by the FA. So that was a bit of a sort of storm going on down there, but probably settled down now, I imagine. One of those players that he took actually from there, Obeng, got that goal at Scunthorpe, and other signings they've made look interesting, like Davies. We know what Davies can be as an attacking fullback or wing back. Can Carlisle expose the defensive side of his game that wasn't his greatest strength? That's where you hope an Ajiboy or Linney should be ready, and Carlisle should be primed to have a look at that side of things in terms of the pitch and see what harm they can cause. Ben Radcliffe's gone there, someone Rob Elliot knows well, and Zane Westbrook has gone in, who was at Scunthorpe before, and Spazoff from Southend. So there's some interesting signings here. I think they make them a firmer operation. McCormick, I think, has been a key man certainly in recent times too. Last season the home record was, well, 1-9, drew 5, lost 9. Not particularly high scorers, but that's last season, and they'll be hoping to be much more on the front foot, I'm quite sure, this time. Last season Carlisle got a 1-1 draw. It wasn't a thrilling spectacle as such. Harvey McAdam got a great goal to pull Carlisle back into it. Things weren't really purring that day for Carlisle. I think it was one of the very early games where Con Clark had come into the team, and I think we were perhaps seeing some of the early teething issues in terms of just accommodating him and his style into the general flow of things, and we know that sort of in the end didn't unfold the way we'd hope. But it's going to be a different kettle of fish on Saturday from both sides. It's a pretty good club at the level. Yeovil have had some troubles in terms of that slide to National League South as well. And as you also touch upon, it's a heck of a long trip. I think it's the second longest, that Carlisle will have this season. Last season, it was an absolute brute of a trip for the club in terms of the traffic they got caught in and all sorts there. So they'll hope for a fair wind on the Friday roads this time, which you can never entirely bank on, can you? But I just hope we're coming out of it come Saturday evening, just feeling a little bit more content about what the early picture looks like for Carlisle, and we're not sort of staring down the barrel of another week of kind of bloodletting, if you like.
You spoke to Rob Elliot earlier in the week, which I don't remember a press conference day being on a Tuesday. What were his thoughts about the game? Obviously, he's probably feeling a bit hurt losing his first home game, first professional, first professional game for Carlisle.
Yeah.
Is he feeling a bit wounded, or is it just a fact of go again, same things, just build and learn from mistakes in the first game?
Yeah, the message was don't come away from what we're planning and what we're trying to do on the back of one game. And I think if a manager was saying anything else, you'd be a bit concerned about his handle on things and his plans and his identity and things. So there was certainly none of that from Rob Elliot. He talked, we touched on the tiredness and the fatigue debate as well. He was pretty adamant that wasn't a factor. He was citing things more like the body language that we've talked about and just that mentality in the face of setback. So, if Carlisle do go behind on Saturday, then it'll be a chance for us to look at that. Hopefully we won't get the chance to look at that. But if that does happen, it's going to happen at stages, of course, over the season. Then, what will that look like based on what Rob Elliot has been saying? What has he been working on psychologically, as well as the structure of things that needs to be more durable as well? So I'm sure he'll be looking for Carlisle's strengths to be on show as they, were more or less in the opening period of that Worthing game. It might not be quite as dominant the first half, I think, as an away team necessarily, but he'll be wanting to accentuate that still, and just sort of stiffen up the resolve, I think, in the other part of the game too. And I'm sure deep down he'll be absolutely desperate for it to go well. And for us not to be looking at a 2-defeat start to the season, because that, for Carlisle at the National League, that'd be a concerning start in the short term, wouldn't it? As much patience as everyone would reasonably want to give this thing, you don't want to be coming off 2 defeats in your opening 2 games as title favourites and title aspirants, do you? So, a bit of short term pressure on the game. Actually, you don't want to ladle that on too much. But there's pressure going to follow Carlisle every week in this level, and they have to be attuned to that, and they've got to thrive on it, and they've got to thrive on it on Saturday. They really do. So let's hope they do that. Now, just on the subject of Yeovil, I've got a trivia question to chuck in as well.
Here we go.
We did one last week, didn't we? I'm sure quite a few people probably got it. I think a few people will get this one too. But let's see if you can get it. Again, it's probably a little bit before your time. You're probably in nappies when this was going on, but. What connects Carlisle's 2-1 defeat at Yeovil in 2007 with England's 2026 World Cup campaign?
Oh, I don't have a clue.
Some people will have got that. I bet some will have got that straight away. Some might be scratching their heads. We'll come to that at the end and see how many people have pinpointed that one. There was some interesting other players in that one, as well as the connection that I'm talking about, but let's come back to that at the end anyway.
And fingers crossed Carlisle pick up those 3 points down at Yeovil, because I think it's one of those games that if we do win, you look back on it and think at the end of the season, a lot of teams could have went there and slipped up. 3 points, get in, get out. Doesn't really matter what happens. The performance, you hope it'll be a good one, but I think 3 points could remedy any ailments about that.
I think there is a question. You don't like to entertain this question when you're talking about a title chasing team, but would a draw be a disaster down there? My inclination is that it probably wouldn't, just in terms of solidifying the start to the season, coming away unscathed. But as we discussed last week, you can't be going for long spells without winning a lot of games in bulk. So I don't think there's many occasions this season we'll be saying we'll settle for a point. If you're going to be wanting to win the title, you can't afford to be doing that. I don't think it would be the end of the world in the wake of last week, but Carlisle have to be going there to win, and we have to be going there expecting to be good enough to win and hoping enough for the parts come together, and we're in a happier frame of mind at the end of it.
Well, before we film this episode, we put a call out to any fans wanting to ask some burning questions. We got 3, so we'll go through them. Super Carlisle, I don't think that's his birth name, asks Wrexham.
Well, a name that would be to be given, wouldn't it?
It would be. Wrexham, Stockport, York, Lincoln, Luton, and others spent many years in non-league. He says, depressing as it may be, at what point do fans and the club need to accept this is a plausible reality? And does that mean anything needs to change in planning for the future? I'll hand that over to you, John, because it's a bleak thought that the club could be here for a long spell, like those clubs mentioned, but it's a possibility.
Well, yeah, of course, it's a possibility. Anything's possible in terms of this sort of nightmare of a league to get out of. It's sort of ferrets in a sack trying to get out of it, isn't it? I think some of those examples, you probably have to look deeper at the circumstances of them. The Wrexham that went into non-league all those years ago were nothing like the Wrexham that were ultimately getting out of it. When Wrexham's money came in, it didn't take them long to sort that out and shoot out of it and look where they are now. Stockport, similar. When the Stott ownership came in there, they started right there to climb back up from National North, didn't they? And it didn't take them long to get some real fuel in their tank. Now, I think this is where people's perceptions of Carlisle come in. People see Carlisle as a club with very wealthy owners all of a sudden, and well, not all of a sudden now. It's coming up for 3 years, but certainly compared with most of the history, it's recent. That Carlisle do have the means to be more than strong at this level, and it's kind of the mishandling of those resources in terms of creating that necessary success just hasn't happened yet. And it's gone backwards from when that takeover happened on the pitch. So I think they're a very well-resourced team and club in terms of the many millions the Piatex have put into it. Now, we know that the approach on the spending front has changed this year, so that's a different angle, I suppose. I think you veer into the risk of almost accepting that Carlisle could be down here for a while, and I don't really see how anyone should let that sort of thinking in, really. Yes, you have to, I'm sure as a business side of things, you have to future-proof and contingency plan for whatever eventualities are out there. There's no guarantee Carlisle get promoted this season or next or the next 5. There's nothing you can be certain of, but Carlisle have to be absolutely set in every way on making sure they're not down here for a long time. And with everything in Carlisle's favour generally at this level, they should be looking to get out of this league in pretty short order. Certain ramifications of being down at this level for a long time are very evident, like things like the academy and how that's funded and how that goes forward in the long run. If this turns into a longer stretch than any of us would like, and to what extent does the Piatex structure of staffing and everything else that they've invested in, how much is that sustained by a longer stretch at the top end of non-league? How much does the club sort of diminish over time in some respects? But I think a lot of that comes down to the will and the backing of the owners to get through these hard, what we hope are transitional times to something better. And to get Carlisle the heck out of this as quick as we can, and that has to inform every decision from owner down on a pretty strong and albeit realistic but ambitious level. So let's not let all that in too much. Carlisle have to be getting out of this league, and they've got to be doing it pronto, and that's what we all want.
The next question is from Sam Pocock, and it's not current affairs related, but it might be putting you on the spot a little bit. But I thought it was one that was quite fun. He says, not to do with anything current affairs, but what's happened to Callum Guy? Been without a club for a year. Is he retired? Any information on that, John? I know Callum was lauded by Carlisle fans, especially after that promotion season. And maybe he's on a lot of Carlisle fans' minds. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting with Callum. I don't really have any up to the minute specific information on him. Sam, thanks for the question. It's something I do think about sometimes. A couple of times I've attempted to reach out to Callum, but it hasn't sort of got anywhere. So that's entirely his right. If he doesn't want to come back into the public sort of eye, and wherever he's doing whatever he's doing now, then good luck to him. And I hope he's all right. I hope he's doing okay. He's not been in first team professional football for a little while now, over the last year or so, has he? I know he appeared for one of his local teams, at a pretty low level of non-league once or twice, didn't he, a few months ago, and scored some brilliant free kick that went semi-viral, I think, among some Carlisle fans too. So a bit of the old magic was there. But that latter season under Williamson and then Hughes, it looked like we got him back for a while, didn't it, in terms of his old self, because he'd come back from that long ACL injury, which must have been a real sort of toil for him to come back from. And then there was an illness issue, which was cited, a health issue, which sounded pretty serious at times over a certain period. But he came back from that again, and then he was gone, and that's been it in terms of first team football at the levels we know Callum Guy has always been very good at in the main. So I know he's a family man. I know they had a new arrival not too long ago, so I hope everything's well and good with his family. Whatever he's doing, I hope he's happy. And you just think someone like Callum Guy would surely have so much still to offer to the game of football, one way or the other, if he wants to do that. If he doesn't, so be it. And we wish him well. I think there's a lot of affection for Callum Guy here, rightly, because of what a stalwart player he was over differing seasons, really, at Carlisle, of differing levels of achievement. But he was a key part of that promotion team under Paul Simpson, wasn't he? And he was a big miss when he got that injury in the League One season. I think Carlisle lost a lot of their fragile security in the team then as well. And I think he's a player, a lot of whose qualities Carlisle have been striving and maybe failing to replace since then in a lot of ways. So we wish him well. I don't imagine he'll be listening or watching this. But if anyone is who knows him, give him our best. If he ever wants to come back and talk Carlisle, we'll be all ears. If he doesn't, good luck and just go well, Callum will say.
And Grant Davidson, it's more of a statement from him, but it's something that I think is on a lot of fans' minds. He says, why management and owners think it's okay not to have a third striker, someone who offers something different, maybe pace, is unacceptable. You can't go through a season with two, especially two with their injury history, and not to be actively looking even more worrying. It's worrying. I agree with the sentiment that we do need a striker that offers something different, and I agree that we're not sat in with the boardroom. Maybe that was one of their main targets for this year, and they just haven't found the right person. We aren't involved in the recruitment side, and we can't sit down with Mark Tierney and say, okay, Mark, top three strikers that you want to sign, who are you picking? As much as I wish we could. But it is a point that we've touched on earlier, and I think a lot of fans have that same mind about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, to my mind, to your mind, to I think probably most supporters, Carlisle need one and need something else. We know Armstrong's not going to be back for a few more weeks. We know Elliot likes the idea of Luamba as an option there, but that's very much an untested option as a number 9. We have to be honest. Whatever qualities, Rob Elliot and others think he might bring to that. Let's hope he does and he flourishes into an option there. But that's a leap of faith at this point. I think Carlisle need a more substantial option there to support what they've got. Now, the idea that they're not looking and they've decided they don't need one, I'm not entirely sure about that. I think if something is so obvious to most of us, I'm sure it's more than obvious to Rob Elliot and his staff as well. When that question is asked, we sort of get into realms of budget questions, and much of the budget, if not all of it, being kind of allocated now in what they've already done and what they've been carrying on the books from previous sort of years and contracts as well. So it doesn't look like there's a lot of obvious wriggle room being sort of granted for Carlisle to do much there. But I'd be flabbergasted if they weren't looking seriously. Now, there's been one or two little rumours kicking around over the last week. Tom Curzon's from Boston is a name that one or two people have mentioned in connection to Carlisle. Elliot didn't really, give that any credence or otherwise when he was asked at his press conference. So let's see on that and one or two other things. But to me, it's so blatantly obvious that surely they are looking to address that somehow. Just because what we touched on before, Georgie Kelly is carrying that burden at the number 9. Regan Linney behind him, trying to get his season going on the second game, hopefully, and a real lack of other senior frontline options. That's where the cupboard is really. Seb Mason is a young striker, but Rob Elliot didn't want to put him on against Worthing. He didn't think it was sort of the right circumstance. So, if he's not really a live option at the moment to come on in that sort of situation, well, Carlisle really are light and really are lacking there. So I hope they're able to do something. I know Rob Elliot talked about meeting Tom Piatek II when he was over, and he's been over this week just to discuss all manner of things. I think it wasn't just about the transfer question and what's in the kitty, but I'd be surprised if that wasn't one of the topics that was aired, just because it seems so apparent that it's where Carlisle is short. And you hope this shortage in the short term doesn't set them back to a point where they really are sort of chasing to make up too much ground, because I think that's another of the fears that was present last Saturday, and in some of the booing perhaps as well. You don't want Carlisle's start to the season to be too hobbled by what they haven't got, when there's such an obvious case for kind of going out and getting it in a way.
Yeah.
So let's see what happens over the days and weeks to come. And it's Grant's point is, I'm sure, echoed by many others. It's whether there's a lack of intent or just a lack of what they're able to get with what they're willing or able to spend, I suppose, too. But I think it's something that needs to happen. I do. I can't deny that I agree with much of that. So let's see.
And just a question I'd like to pose to Grant and other fans watching is, if there was a striker who's readily available now, who would you pick? Because I don't think you're going to get strikers from the level that Carlisle will want, maybe that are happy to sit on the bench when Georgie Kelly's firing, especially if you're looking for something different. You want a pacey striker, in my opinion. So it's a tough one. And like you said, if it's so glaringly obvious to fans, the club will know about it, and it will be on that to-do list in the recruitment department.
Yeah, you hope so, and then it's how they
Yeah.
act on it and how they feel they're able to act on it, and all of those things as well. So that comes into the mix, yeah.
And it could be a case of, it's happened in football many a time, where they don't want to go and spend the money on a player that's not their number one choice, because the number one choice isn't available. And you might see further in the season some moves towards that number one choice that maybe they have. It's all very, like you say, brinkmanship with transfers, and you want the right person. And in my opinion, I don't think if Carlisle last season couldn't get Linney, they would have wasted that money on a player not as good as Linney. I think the club likes to get their number one target. You can see with Aziz and with Linney and with Chris Clark when they waited so long for him. It's maybe something that Mark Tierney likes as a sporting director, or maybe it's the manager. We'll have to wait and see on that one.
Yeah, they need a workable option up there, though, I think, in addition.
Yeah.
And all things considered, you'd like to think Carlisle should be able to get one, whether that's the loan market, whether it's whatever options are there, which they've only dipped the toes into with Malarkey at the back. There's still a world of players out there, and you like to think surely there's one, but then it comes down to the detail, doesn't it, about what the recruitment team, etc., can find and source, and what's gettable and what's right for the short and longer term too. So we shall wait and see, and hope that Yeovil makes that less urgent in appearance as a need than it might seem at the moment.
We've got one last thing, the trivia, John.
Yes. What everyone has been on the edge of the seats for, I'm quite sure. What connects Carlisle United's 2-1 defeat at Yeovil in 2007 with England's 2026 World Cup campaign? And the answer is, go on.
I was thinking,
you're going to have a guess.
The 2 goals conceded from being 1-0 up against Argentina were the same minute, but I think that's too niche.
That is too niche, I'm afraid. Yeah. Good thinking. Yeah, good angle. But no, I'm talking about an individual here. In the Yeovil midfield that day was Anthony Barry, Thomas Tuchel's number 2. He played the full game in Yeovil's midfield. He was there for a couple of years, and his sort of lower league midfield days. And yeah, so he played the 90 minutes against John Ward's Carlisle. I think it was the first defeat that John Ward suffered, actually, after coming in as manager in that season. So Anthony Barry, the Yeovil's midfield general, now Thomas Tuchel's lieutenant, I suppose, in the World Cup. We saw him giving some of those at times quite emotional halftime interviews, didn't we, in the World Cup?
Yeah.
So it's always amazing to look back. I often find it at games of yesteryear and see where certain people end up, and players at the time that you might not ever consider might end up being sort of championship or managers or international coaches one day. I mean, the Yeovil's winner that day was scored by Nathan Jones, a free kick. Now the Charlton manager, of course, he's had a good managerial career too. Paul Warne, who's managed at various levels, MK Dons at the moment, he was in their side too. So amazing to look at where some of these guys turn up. I mean, just to touch on the Carlisle 11 that day, Westwood, Raven, Arenaldi, Murphy, Livesey, Hackney, Jeff Smith, Bridge Wilkinson, Lumsden, Gall, and Graham. And in most of those cases, that's the core of really Carlisle's best side of the last, couple of decades, really. That was that side that came so close to getting to the championship in League One. So, those names trip off the tongue when you go back to that era, don't they? And And there we go, a bit of Yeovil trivia. I mean, another favourite Yeovil game before we sort of wrap up, if we're talking about trips to Hewish Park, was the FA Cup third round replay in 2015-16. This was an absolute epic occasion. It had happened when, as many will remember, when the floods had recently happened and Carlisle had played one or two games at other grounds for home games, and the FA Cup tie against Yeovil, the home game was at Blackpool. It was a 2-2 draw, and then off we went to Hewish Park on a freezing midweek night for the right to play Everton in the fourth round. So there was a huge amount of incentive on it, and more so for Carlisle, really, given what they'd been through as a club with the floods, and they were just getting Brunton Park back in operation. There was such devastation and damage had happened, and you know, the club at the epicenter of that in some ways. And the game itself, it had layer upon layer of drama and controversy and nail biting. You know, there was Yeovil took the lead, Carlisle got back level. There was the sort of quite remarkable sort of set two in the Yeovil area where there was scuffling and shoving, and then Jabo Ibarre comes steaming in with an arm out and clotheslined the Yeovil keeper. Now somehow avoided getting sent off. That's one of nature's miracles that happened. I mean, if you were to choose a man that you don't want coming at you to clothesline you, it's probably Jabo, isn't it? You imagine you're going to another dimension. So anyway, and then that wasn't even the end of it, because, you know, we had Francois Zoka with a last-minute penalty against his old club, and he managed to pop it wide, a terrible penalty wide of Mark Gillespie's goal, and then on it went into extra time and penalties, and lo and behold, you know, it come down to Mark Ellis just smacking one in to win it for Carlisle, and the pitch was just about freezing by that point as well. I remember leaving the ground at the end of that night; it was getting quite rock hard, and just all the emotion of that occasion, you felt absolutely exhausted coming out of it. And Carlisle had this great sort of day of celebration and renewal at Brunton Park against Everton, where the place was packed in the FA Cup. So it'll be going some for Saturday to be as dramatic as that, I think, in many ways. Yeah. We'll take a horrible, anonymous, grey, dull, forgettable 1-0 win, won't we? But if it's a dramatic win and there's some good entertainment and good football on show, we'll take that as well. But I think result first, the rest later on Saturday, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us for episode 4. If you're not making the trip down to Somerset and you can't sample the cider, make sure you follow John's live blog on our website. Plenty of coverage coming up throughout the weekend. Anything from you, John?
Just a brief word of thanks to everyone that's continuing to listen to us and watch us with the Blues Notebook too. We're our subscriber numbers on YouTube are creeping up. We're inching towards that 200 mark now, which will be a nice milestone too. So we're really grateful for everyone that's given us a go. So hit that subscribe button, please, and it'll support us and it'll help us just keep this going and growing, and hopefully, you know, grow and expand it along the way. And don't forget our subscription offer at the News and Star as well, £6 for 6 months. That gets you access to absolutely everything. That offer is open for a couple more weeks, so it will be coming to an end before too long. So, you know, it's on the website and on my social media, our Facebook group as well. We've talked about it in past episodes, but all the information's there. So get onto that if you want all the coverage, and we hope the coverage from Somerset we'll have a sunny disposition, don't we?
Absolutely. If there's anything you want to ask us for next week, please just leave it in the comments or tag one of us on X or any other place you think you can get in touch with us. Feel free to just drop a comment and a question, and we'll try and answer it to the best of our abilities. Thank you once again for joining us, and we'll see you next week.